Right. Let's look at what it means to work in a forensic lab, or what I'm going to be talking about when I say you're going to go back to your lab and do this. I'm going to say that several times throughout these lessons. And so this is what I mean when I talk about a forensic lab. The forensic laboratory has two major purposes when it comes to forensic science, when it comes to crime scene investigation. The forensic lab is responsible for the analysis of evidence, and it's involved in all aspects of evidence recognition, evidence collection, and evidence preservation. The lab must ensure that law enforcement officers, that investigators, that attorneys, that judges and juries are also educated in understanding the parameters which surround the collection and testing of evidence. So the two major things that a forensic laboratory has to do is analyze evidence and then educate everybody else about what that evidence actually means and what it doesn't mean. You can't assume that a lawyer or a judge or anybody actually knows what the hell you're talking about when you're talking science. Remember, you're a scientist first, and so you have all of this background and all of this knowledge and all of this jargon. You want to educate other people as well. Now, forensic labs come in all shapes and sizes. The type of the lab really doesn't matter. The size of the lab doesn't really matter. It's the quality of the forensic scientists in the lab that make all the difference. So, I'm sure you're used to seeing some of these labs on TV, where they've got the big, beautiful open spaces. They look amazing and super high tech. Yeah, that's one or two labs, I suppose, all the labs with all of the money. But there are other labs that work just as well. So up at the top here, this is one of the FBI labs. Here is one of those labs with a lot of money. Here is what we more typically see as a lab in, say, a police station. Okay, you've got a room, basically, and some tables. Look, there's a microscope. Hey, look, super fancy comparison scope. That's neat. Some guns. And a computer. So you can do all of your analysis in here. You don't need super fancy things. There are some labs that are even less high-tech than that. I mean, this is basically just a side bench at somebody's office. You got some cabinets, you got a microscope, and they can still do some really robust forensic analysis given this setup. So it doesn't really matter the setup. Forensic laboratories need to have good scientists, and they also have to have what's called a quality assurance program. So this is something that is required for all forensic scientist labs, or all forensics labs. You need to have a QA program, quality assurance program. These are required by law, and we're going to go over that a little bit in the next unit, but the federal government has set down the law that you need to have these QA systems in place, because this is going to allow scientists to do things like ensuring that their reported results are actually scientifically valid, that their opinions are based on results, and that they're deemed reliable, and that they're following the best practices. So you need to have it in place regardless of how much money or how little money your lab actually has. So QA programs can include things like staff education requirements. So you can have your staff be required to go to a certain amount of continuing education, or they need to have a bachelor's or a master's or a PhD in order to work there, whatever. It may require peer review of results. So you come up with some results and you send it off to somebody else, and they have to review it for the scientist just to double check that they're not making crap up. You have to have specific case file documentation methods. So there are certain ways that you're going to document what you are doing. You have to do that every single time. You have to have specific requirements for who you distribute reports to and who you don't. And you want to keep these things as secure as possible, but while making sure that the people who need to see them actually see them. There's going to be some auditing of testimony. Are people actually testifying correctly? Are your scientists doing what they need to do? It's going to be some evidence handling and some laboratory security. How are you going to handle this incoming evidence? We're going to talk about something called the chain of custody in a few lessons, and that has to be robust and it has to be in place. You also have to have security in your lab. How are you going to keep people from just wandering in off the street and taking these guns that are just out on this table? Finally, you want to have proficiency tests. These are simulated cases which will assist your criminalists, your scientists in determining their error rates. How good are they at their job? Now, there are a variety of types of labs out there. We've got government laboratories, we've got the FBI, the ATF, DEA, all of those have labs that they do forensic science stuff in. But there are also private labs. These private labs can provide forensic testing to the police or to defendants or to whomever needs it. And the thing is with private labs is since they are not publicly funded, they can provide retesting services for evidence that have already been examined by public labs. So then we have some extra quality control. Now, the staffing issues. So remember last lesson I talked about forensics. So remember that forensic has to do with anything that is associated with a court of law. I'm going to get a little more specific. So when I say forensics in terms of staff, we're talking about a forensic scientist. Forensics is a general term in this case. It may be applied to any number of disciplines, anything like anthropology or odontology, but it has to do with a science. Now, a criminalist or criminalistics, this is somebody who applies chemistry, biology, or physics to evidence analysis and addresses crime scene investigation and reconstruction. A criminalist isn't necessarily a scientist. This is one of the issues that we've come into with the forensic sciences over the past decade or so. For a long time, the people out there analyzing evidence didn't actually know what they were doing. And when I say that, I mean, they knew how to process evidence. They knew how to run some tests. What they didn't know was they didn't know the chemical reactions behind those tests. They could extract DNA, but they didn't actually understand what DNA was or what they were extracting or how they were extracting it. This has become a real issue. Think about somebody who just knows how to apply something. Let's say, for those of you who don't quite know how to work a computer, like how you can't build your own computer, right? You can use a computer, works really well, but if something goes wrong, you're screwed, aren't you? And if it's not you, you know somebody like this, somebody who can happily type away on a Word document. But the second that something gets messed up, they can't fix it. So they have to go and spend a ridiculous amount of money talking to, I don't know, the Geek Squad or something, or going to the Genius Bar at Apple, whatever it is. And sometimes it's a super easy fix, right? With a little bit of education, you can actually get in there and say, oh, I just need to restart. Awesome. Or, oh, I need a little bit more RAM. Whatever. Easy to do. So that's basically the difference between a forensic scientist and a criminalist. A criminalist can use what the forensic scientists come up with, but if something goes wrong or they need to reinterpret something or something weird happens, they can't do any of that. So when we talk about staffing, we'll have one of these two things. We'll have the forensic scientists and we'll have the criminalists. And I've given you some pictures of some popular examples of these two things. So on CSI, you've got all of those people on there. You've got Catherine Willows here. You've got all of the people on CSI that they're really criminalists. They don't have a scientific background. They don't have that higher education. They've basically done some basic work and they have a lot of experience, so they can use, a lot of these tools, but they don't really understand them and they can't come up with new tools. That's another big thing. Bones, on the other hand, she's that PhD, brilliant scientist, anthropologist who does her forensic science stuff. So that's the major difference here. Now, people who work in a forensic lab, you can expect when you first apply for a forensic science type of position or a criminalist type position, you're going to go through some pretty hardcore interview processes. So if you're interested in that, pay attention. You're going to go through a very, very thorough background investigation. So, you're going to have people calling your friends and your family and whoever else and asking about your morals and asking about your past and asking about everything. You're going to do a polygraph. So you want to make sure that you're able to pass this basic lie detector test. They're going to ask you things like, have you done drugs? If you have, tell them. The end. You have to be able to pass your polygraph. They're going to ask you if you've done things like child molestation. Really horrible crap. Okay? And they do this on purpose. they're going to give you a history of illegal drug abuse or drug use. They're going to ask you if you've done it, and they're going to screen you for it. You're going to take a lot of drug tests. They're going to do a driving record check. They're going to do a residential history check, or they're going to do your employment check, all of these things, because you are working in an area that is a very, very delicate situation. Now, the crime lab that you work in, or any crime lab, has to be accredited in order to actually be able to work with evidence. So the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors focuses on accreditation of laboratories. Crime labs are accredited for 5 years at a time. And that accreditation process includes a comprehensive inspection, it includes interviews with staff, a review of the written procedures, and a review of their quality assurance programs. So if you ever hear in the news about a crime lab losing its accreditation, basically what happened is one of these things just didn't pass muster when the inspection happened. If you are a criminalist, if you decide that you want to go the criminalist route, a criminalist, you have to be awarded certification by the American Board of Criminalists or by other international type of associations, something like the International Association of Identification, something like that. To maintain your certification once you get it, you need to complete professional activities. You actually need to be working with evidence. You need to attend or provide training to people. You need to write for scientific journals. You need to attend meetings. You need to complete a proficiency test. So all of these things need to happen over and over and over again. Now, if you would decide to become a forensic scientist and you want to specialize in a particular area, you will be awarded accreditation through specialized bodies, things like the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, or I have an example up here of NAFIA. This is the Forensic Entomology Association. They will award you based on individual criteria that each one of these bodies puts down and decides that they want to actually put out there. Now, when you become a forensic examiner, either a forensic scientist or a criminalist, you need to do some personal upkeep of your knowledge. So to become a forensic examiner, you need to possess at least a BS, baccalaureate degree in a natural science. I would suggest emphasizing physics or biology, chemistry, or a good forensic science program. So you need a lot of science. Now, on-the-job training, this is what you're going to get in order to figure out how to take your base knowledge and apply it. Entry-level criminalists are going to gain necessary skills and knowledge for career development, things like how to lift fingerprints or how to look at a DNA fingerprint, something like that. If you want to go into something more technical, like a DNA technical manager, you need to have a master's degree at the very least. If you want to be an expert witness in certain areas, you need to have a PhD. So you need to keep up your skills while you're doing all of this. So you want to review some research journals, things like the Journal of Forensic Sciences. Now, I've got a link to this journal up on eCampus. This is a link to actually our library's version of this journal, or library's electronic version of this journal. This is where a lot of the newest research is being published, and there's some fascinating things in there. So you want to keep up with the Journal of Forensic Sciences. Then you want to review historical works. A lot of these basic sciences are based on history, and a lot of your accreditation programs mean that you have to know the history of your particular area. So I'll be going over some of the history for some of these things over and over and over again. But there is some important historical works in whatever area you're in that you'll need to review. There is a book by Gross, O'Hara, Osterberg, and Kirk that are viable sources. So I have this up for you. Viable sources to learning more about the field of forensic science. So I have a link to this up under books for you, so you can go look at it if you're interested. Now, you want to understand the role of a criminalist. So criminalists provide investigative leads through scientific evaluation of physical evidence, and they look at crime scene reconstruction. They report their results and they report their conclusions of their scientific evaluations. They can provide expert testimony, and criminalists must be able to use their own ability to ask questions and investigate available information. Criminalists will serve as an educator to law enforcement. They'll serve as an educator to judges and attorneys and various people. They can serve as educators to medical professionals. And so they need to stay appraised of any changes in their particular field. And the field is in constant change. Constantly changing. So for this reason, you also will need to get a lot of continuing education. We're going to stop there. Up next, you're going to move on to Unit 2, and we're going to look a lot at the laws. All right, have a fantastic day, and I'll talk to you soon. Let me know if you have any questions.